The rain drummed against the tin roof of my small cottage, a gentle lullaby that normally calmed my nerves after a long day. But tonight, my hands trembled as I tucked my daughter into bed, brushing her dark curls away from her forehead. Sophia's eyelids fluttered, fighting sleep as 4-year-olds often do. "One more story, Mommy," she pleaded, her hazel eyes, so much like her father's, gazing up at me. "Not tonight, sweetheart." I kissed her forehead, inhaling the sweet scent of her baby shampoo. "The Sandman is waiting. Will you check for monsters?" I smiled. Our nightly ritual as comforting to me as it was to her. No monsters allowed in this house, remember? After checking under the bed and inside the wardrobe, I tucked the blanket around her tiny shoulders and switched on her nightlight. Casting the room in a soft golden glow, I lingered in the doorway, watching her breathing slow into the rhythm of sleep, marveling at how something so precious could have come from such darkness. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I made my way to the kitchen. Our cottage was small but sufficient. One bedroom for Sophia, another for me, a bathroom with temperamental plumbing, and a kitchen that opened into a modest living area. It wasn't much, but here in this remote village nestled in the mountains, it was home. Safe. Anonymous. I poured myself a glass of cheap red wine and sank into the worn armchair by the window, gazing out at the darkness. The village lights twinkled in the distance. Most homes already dark at this hour. Everyone knew everyone here, or rather, they knew the version of me I'd carefully constructed. Emma Wilson, single mother, freelance translator, a quiet woman with a mysterious past that the locals had long since stopped trying to unravel. None of them knew I had once been Alessandra Ricci, wife of Dominic Castellano, the most feared man in Chicago. My finger traced the faint scar along my collarbone, a souvenir from my previous life. 5 years had passed since I'd fled in the dead of night, leaving behind luxury and terror in equal measure. 5 years of looking over my shoulder, of jumping at shadows, of building a life piece by fragile piece. 5 years of keeping Sophia secret from her father. Lightning flashed, illuminating the rain-slicked road that wound through the village. For a moment, I thought I saw headlights in the distance, and my heart lurched painfully against my ribs. But it was nothing. Just my paranoia playing tricks again. I sipped my wine, trying to steady my nerves. Tomorrow was Thursday, which meant opening the small bookshop I managed in the village, a quiet day of arranging displays and helping the occasional tourist find a vacation read. Simple, safe. Boring, even. Exactly what I needed. The storm grew more intense, rain lashing against the windows as if demanding entry. I was about to draw the curtains when I saw it. The unmistakable gleam of headlights cutting through the darkness, moving slowly up the hill toward my isolated cottage. My wineglass slipped from my fingers, shattering against the wooden floor. Red liquid pooled like blood at my feet, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. No one came here. Not at this hour. Not in this weather. Not unless they were looking for someone. The vehicle, an expensive black SUV that looked grotesquely out of place in our humble village, pulled to a stop in front of my cottage. My throat closed as the driver's door opened, and a large man emerged, his face obscured by the rain and darkness. He opened the rear passenger door, and that's when I saw him. Even from this distance, even after 5 years, I would recognize that silhouette anywhere. The broad shoulders, the confident stance, the way he paused to button his suit jacket before stepping into the rain, disdainful of the elements that would dare touch him. Dominic. My legs gave out, and I collapsed back into the chair. How had he found me after all this time? I'd been so careful, changing my name, my appearance, moving across an ocean to this tiny village where no one would think to look for the runaway wife of a mafia boss. Yet here he was, walking up the stone path to my door, flanked by his ever-present shadow, Marco, his most trusted lieutenant and bodyguard, the same man who had taught me to shoot a gun, just in case, the same man who had looked the other way when I fled. I had seconds to decide, wake Sophia and run out the back. There was nowhere to go in this storm, nowhere to hide in a village this small. Fight? Laughable. The knife block was across the room, and what good would a kitchen knife do against men who had survived countless assassination attempts? The knock came. 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through my bones, authoritative, familiar, dangerous. I stood on shaky legs, smoothing down my faded jeans and oversized sweater, suddenly acutely aware of how different I looked from the polished, expensively dressed woman he'd last seen. My once long black hair was now cut in a practical bob and dyed a nondescript brown. I'd lost weight, the softness of wealth replaced by the leanness of a working mother's life. Another knock, more insistent this time. If I didn't answer, he would break down the door. Dominic Castellano wasn't a man accustomed to being kept waiting. Wiping my sweaty palms on my jeans, I moved toward the door, careful to avoid the broken glass. Each step felt like walking through concrete. I unlocked the door with trembling fingers, but kept the chain fastened, a futile gesture of defiance. When I pulled the door open those few inches the chain would allow, the scent hit me first. Expensive cologne mingled with the earthy smell of rain, a combination that catapulted me back 5 years to another life. Then I saw his face, and my world tilted. Dominic looked older, the fine lines around his eyes more pronounced, a touch of silver at his temples that hadn't been there before. But his eyes, those hazel eyes that could shift from warmth to ice in seconds, were exactly the same, now widening slightly as they took in my transformed appearance. Alessandra. My real name in his voice sent shivers down my spine. Low, controlled, with that slight Italian accent that became more pronounced when he was angry. And he was angry now. I could see it in the rigid set of his jaw, the whiteness of his knuckles as he gripped the doorframe. "What are you doing here?" My voice emerged as a whisper, nearly lost in the sound of the rain. 5 years, he said softly, dangerously. 5 years of searching, and I find you hiding in this. He glanced around with undisguised disdain. This shack in the middle of nowhere. How did you find me? A cold smile curved his lips. You used your mother's maiden name. Sloppy, cara mia. I taught you better than that. Stupid, stupid mistake. But I'd been desperate when I'd created my new identity, and Wilson had felt safe, common enough to blend in. I hadn't counted on Dominic's relentlessness, his resources, his refusal to let go of what he considered his. What do you want? I asked, though I already knew. Dominic hadn't come all this way for closure. Open the door, Alessandra, not a request. Never a request with him. No. I gripped the door tighter. Whatever you came to say, you can say it like this. His eyes narrowed, and I saw the muscle in his jaw tick. The warning sign I'd learned to recognize during our marriage. 5 years ago, you disappeared in the middle of the night. No note, no explanation. Just gone, along with $2 million from my private account. His voice remained eerily calm. Now, I've found you living in poverty in this godforsaken village. I think that earns me a proper conversation, don't you? I swallowed hard. The money. Of course he would mention the money first. I needed it to start over. $2 million to live like this? His eyebrow arched in disbelief as he gestured to my modest home. Where's the rest of it, Alessandra? Safe, I said, lifting my chin. Insurance. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Open the door. Now. Mom? A small voice behind me turned my blood to ice. Who are you talking to? I whirled around to see Sophia standing in the hallway, rubbing her eyes sleepily, her dark curls tousled from sleep. Her favorite stuffed rabbit dangled from one hand, dragging on the floor behind her. Go back to bed, sweetie, I said, trying to keep the panic from my voice. It's just a friend of Mommy's. But it was too late. Dominic had heard her, had seen the flash of fear in my eyes. I turned back to find him staring through the gap in the door, his expression frozen in shock as he caught sight of the little girl behind me. Move aside, he said, his voice so quiet I barely heard it over the rain. Dominic, please. Move. Aside. Each word was enunciated with deadly precision. With a resigned sigh, I closed the door, unlatched the chain, and opened it again. There was no point in resistance now. Dominic stepped inside, rainwater dripping from his expensive wool coat onto my worn wooden floors. Marco remained outside, taking position by the door, his broad back to us as he scanned the surrounding darkness, ever the vigilant protector. Dominic's focus was entirely on Sophia, who stared up at him with curious eyes. Eyes exactly like his own. Hello, she said with the innocent friendliness of a child who had never learned to fear strangers. I'm Sophia. Who are you? I watched as Dominic's expression transformed, the cold anger melting into something I couldn't quite read. He lowered himself to one knee, bringing himself to Sophia's level. A gesture so uncharacteristic of the man who towered over business associates and enemies alike that it left me momentarily stunned. "Hello, Sophia," he said, his voice gentler than I'd ever heard it. "My name is Dominic. I'm an old friend of your mother's." She tilted her head, studying him with the serious concentration only children can muster. "You talk funny." A smile, a real smile, not the cold, calculating one I was accustomed to, briefly touched his lips. "I'm from Italy. Do you know where that is?" She nodded eagerly. "Mommy showed me on the map. It looks like a boot." "That's right." He glanced up at me, and the warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by an accusation so profound it nearly knocked me back a step. "How old are you, Sophia?" 4.5, she announced proudly, holding up 4 fingers and then a fifth halfway. "I'm going to school next year." Dominic did the math instantly. I saw it in the tightening of his expression, the slight flare of his nostrils. 4.5 years, plus 9 months of pregnancy. Exactly the length of time since I'd left him. "Sophia," I said, finding my voice at last. "It's very late. Go back to bed, please. But I want to talk to Mr. Dominic," she protested, clutching her rabbit tighter. "Tomorrow," I promised, though the word tasted like ash in my mouth. Right now, little girls need their sleep. With a dramatic sigh that only preschoolers can perfect, she turned toward her bedroom, then paused and looked back at Dominic. "Will you still be here tomorrow?" Dominic's eyes never left mine as he answered her. "Yes, Piccola. I'm not going anywhere." The threat in those words was unmistakable. I ushered Sophia back to bed, tucking her in with trembling hands and promising that yes, her new friend would be there in the morning, and no, there was nothing to worry about. If only that were true. When I returned to the living room, Dominic had removed his wet coat and draped it over the back of a chair. He stood by the window, staring out at the rain, a glass of my cheap wine in his hand. The domesticity of the scene was jarring, like finding a wolf lounging on your sofa. "She has my eyes," he said without turning around. "My mother's curls." I said nothing. What could I possibly say? Were you ever going to tell me? Now he did turn, and the raw pain in his expression caught me off guard. Dominic Castellano didn't do vulnerability. He was made of harder stuff, ambition and calculation and ruthless pragmatism. "No," I admitted, seeing no point in lying now. "Why?" The question hung between us, loaded with 5 years of absence. I laughed, a hollow sound that scraped my throat. "Why? You really need to ask that question, Dominic?" "Yes." He set down the wineglass with deliberate care. "I need to hear you say it. Why did my wife steal $2 million from me, flee in the middle of the night, and hide my daughter from me for nearly 5 years?" "Because I was terrified." The words burst from me, louder than intended. I lowered my voice, conscious of Sophia sleeping nearby. "Because the night before I left, I watched you order a man's death over dinner. Over pasta, Dominic. You were twirling spaghetti around your fork while deciding how to dispose of someone who'd crossed you." He had the audacity to look confused. "That was business, Alessandra. It had nothing to do with us, with our family. It had everything to do with us, with the life I didn't want my child born into." Dominic's expression hardened, the brief vulnerability replaced by the cold, calculating look I remembered so well. He moved toward me with the fluid grace of a predator, and I fought the urge to step back. "So you decided," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "that the best solution was to disappear with my unborn child, rather than talk to me? Rather than give me a chance to protect my family? Protect?" I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the cottage. "You were the danger, Dominic. Your world, your business, your enemies. How many assassination attempts did you survive during our marriage? 3? 4? 5. He corrected automatically, then shook his head. "I kept you safe. Always." "But could you have kept her safe?" I gestured toward Sophia's bedroom. "A child needs stability, normalcy. Not bulletproof cars and bodyguards at her preschool. He moved closer, close enough that I could see the faint scar above his right eyebrow. A souvenir from the second attempt on his life, just months after our wedding. You had no right to make that decision alone. I had every right, I hissed. I'm her mother. And I'm her father. His voice rose slightly before he caught himself, glancing toward Sophia's room. When he continued, it was barely above a whisper. A father you denied the chance to even know existed. The guilt I'd buried for years surged up, threatening to choke me. I turned away, unable to bear the accusation in his eyes. The money, he said after a moment. Where is it? In a trust for Sophia, for her education, her future. I looked back at him, chin lifted. I haven't touched a cent for myself. Something like respect flickered across his face. Always practical, my Alessandra. I'm not yours anymore, I reminded him, though the words felt hollow even to my own ears. No? He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my cheek. I hated how my body remembered him, how I had to fight the instinct to lean into his touch. Then why did you keep my name for her? Sophia Castellano, not Wilson, not whatever fiction you've been living. I stepped away from his touch. Her birth certificate says Wilson. But that's not what you call her, is it? His knowing smile told me he'd already confirmed this somehow. Not in private, not when it's just the two of you. He was right. In quiet moments, in bedtime stories and private conversations, she was always Sophia Castellano. I'd told myself it was to keep her connected to her heritage, but perhaps some part of me had never truly believed we could stay hidden forever. What happens now? I asked, the fight draining out of me. You've found us. What do you want? Dominic studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. That depends on you, cara mia. Don't call me that, I said automatically. Old habits. He moved to the window again, gazing out at the storm. Lightning illuminated his profile. The straight nose, the strong jaw, the features I saw every day in our daughter's face. I want to know my daughter. I want her to know me. As what? The father who runs one of the largest criminal organizations in America? The words were harsh, but the fear behind them was real. What will you tell her when she's old enough to understand what you do? He turned back to me, eyes flashing. The same thing my father told me, that I'm a businessman who protects our family and our interests. Pretty words for ugly truths. And what pretty lies have you been telling her about her father? He countered. Or have you told her anything at all? I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Sophia had started asking about her father months ago, natural curiosity that I'd deflected with vague stories about a man who lived far away. I'd been dreading the day when those simple explanations wouldn't be enough. She deserves to know her father, Dominic said, softer now, sensing my wavering resolve. And I deserve to know her. And me? I asked, the question escaping before I could stop it. What do you plan to do with me? Your runaway wife who stole your money and your child. Something dangerous and possessive flared in his eyes. You are still my wife, Alessandra. No divorce papers were ever filed. What's mine remains mine. A chill ran down my spine. I'm not a possession, Dominic. No, he agreed, moving closer again. You're much more dangerous than that. You're the only person who ever made me vulnerable. The raw honesty in his voice caught me off guard. Dominic never admitted vulnerability. Not even to me. Especially not to me. Is that why you're here? I asked. Because I wounded your pride. Pride? He laughed, a harsh sound with no humor. You think this is about pride? For 5 years I've had men searching every corner of the globe for you. 5 years of wondering if you were dead or alive, if you'd found someone else, if you were happy without me. His voice dropped to a whisper. 5 years of an empty house that stopped being a home the moment you left. I swallowed hard, fighting against the emotion his words stirred. You never struck me as sentimental. I'm not. I'm practical. And the practical truth is that nothing has worked right since you left. He ran a hand through his rain-damp hair, a rare gesture of frustration. Business is fine. Money is fine. But nothing else. Outside, The storm was beginning to ease, the rain softening to a gentle patter against the roof. Marco remained at his post by the door, a dark silhouette visible through the window, seemingly impervious to the weather. "You can't just walk back into our lives and expect everything to be as you want it," I said, trying to sound firm despite the uncertainty churning inside me. "We've built a life here. Sophia has friends, a routine. I have a job. We're settled." Dominic glanced around the modest cottage with obvious disdain. "This is not the life she deserves. Not the life you deserve." "It's safe," I insisted. "Quiet, normal." "It's hiding," he corrected. "And now that I've found you, there's no point in continuing the charade." I sank onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. "What are you suggesting? That we pack up and return to Chicago with you? Back to a life of looking over our shoulders, of bulletproof cars and security protocols?" "Things have changed," he said, taking a seat beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. "The organization has evolved. Legitimate businesses, political connections. The dangerous times are mostly behind us." I gave him a skeptical look. "Mostly?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Nothing worth having comes without risk, Alessandra. You taught me that. Sophia isn't a risk I'm willing to take. Nor am I." His expression grew serious, "which is why I've spent the past 5 years creating a world where she could be safe, where both of you could be safe." The sincerity in his voice was almost convincing, but I'd learned long ago that Dominic Castellano was most dangerous when he seemed most earnest. "I need time," I said finally. It's too much to process at once." He nodded, though I could see the impatience he was fighting to control. Dominic was not a man accustomed to waiting, to compromise. "You have until morning to decide." "Decide what, exactly?" "Whether you and Sophia return to Chicago willingly, as my family," his voice hardened slightly, "or whether I take legal measures to secure my parental rights." The threat hung in the air between us. I had no doubt that Dominic had the resources and connections to make good on it, to tear apart the life I'd carefully constructed here. "You wouldn't," I whispered, though I knew better. "I've lost 5 years with my daughter," he said quietly. "I won't lose another day." We sat in tense silence as the last of the storm passed, leaving only the soft patter of raindrops and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. Eventually, Dominic stood, straightening his suit jacket with an unconscious gesture of authority. "It's late," he said. "We'll continue this discussion in the morning, when Sophia is awake. I want to meet my daughter properly." "Where will you stay?" I asked, suddenly realizing the implications of his presence in our small village. "There's only one inn, and they'll have questions." A cold smile curved his lips. "I own the property 2 kilometers down the road, the old vineyard. I've owned it for 3 years. The revelation struck me like a physical blow. 3 years? You've known where we were for 3 years, and you just watched us?" "Not quite." He adjusted his cuffs, not meeting my eyes. "I knew you were in this region. The property was a strategic acquisition while my men narrowed down the search. We only confirmed your exact location 2 days ago." My mind reeled at the implications. For years, I'd believed we were truly hidden, truly safe. But Dominic had been closing in all along, patient as a spider weaving its web. "I'll send a car for you both at 9 tomorrow morning," he said. "All business now. Pack whatever is essential for Sophia. The rest can be replaced." "I haven't agreed to anything yet," I protested. He paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression that mingled determination with something softer, something almost like hope. "Sleep well, Alessandra. Tomorrow is the first day of our daughter's real life, with both her parents." With that, he opened the door and stepped out into the damp night. Marco materialized from the shadows, opening an umbrella over his boss with practiced efficiency. I watched through the window as they walked to the waiting SUV, Dominic's back straight, his stride confident, as if he'd already won. Perhaps he had. I locked the door and leaned against it, sliding down until I sat on the floor, my knees drawn up to my chest. The house felt different somehow, as if Dominic's presence had altered its very atmosphere, tainting tainting my sanctuary with memories and fears I'd spent years trying to outrun. Sleep was out of the question. Instead, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the hours tick by on the old clock above the stove. My mind raced through options, scenarios, possible futures. None of them seemed to lead anywhere but back to Dominic. I could run again, wake Sophia and flee in the night, but where would we go? How far could we get before Dominic's resources caught up with us? And what would another uprooting do to Sophia, who had only ever known the stability of this village? I could fight him legally, but with what? I had stolen his money, fled with his child, created false identities. No court would look favorably on my actions, regardless of my reasons. Dominic, with his army of lawyers and connections, would paint me as unstable, unfit. He would win, and I would lose everything. Or I could return with him, back to the life I'd fled, a life of luxury and danger in equal measure. Back to a marriage that had been intense, passionate, but ultimately based on lies. I had fallen in love with Dominic Castellano, believing him to be a successful businessman with old family money. By the time I discovered the truth about his business, I was already wearing his ring, already carrying his name. Dawn broke, pale light filtering through the kitchen window. In a few hours, Dominic would return, expecting an answer, expecting surrender. A small noise from the doorway made me turn. Sophia stood there in her pink pajamas, hair tousled from sleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Mommy? Why are you up so early?" She patted over to me, climbing into my lap with the easy confidence of a child who has never known rejection. I wrapped my arms around her, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her small body against mine. Everything I had done, the running, the hiding, the lies, had been for her, to protect her from Dominic's world, from the violence and danger that surrounded him like an aura. But as I held her, I was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. In trying to protect her from her father's world, I had denied her her father, a father who, despite everything, clearly wanted to know her. "Mommy, is your friend coming back today?" Sophia asked, playing with the buttons on my cardigan, the one with the funny voice. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, my decision crystallizing as I spoke. "In fact, there's something important I need to tell you about Mr. Dominic." And Sophia looked up at me with curious eyes, so trusting, so innocent. How could I possibly explain the complexity of her origins in terms a 4-year-old could understand? "What about him, Mommy?" she prompted when I hesitated too long. I took a deep breath. "Sweetheart, do you remember when you asked me about your daddy and I told you he lived far away?" She nodded solemnly. "You said he had important business and couldn't be with us." My heart twisted at her simple acceptance of the half-truths I'd fed her. "Well, Mr. Dominic, he's your father, Sophia. He's your daddy." Her eyes widened, perfect little replicas of Dominic's. "My daddy," she whispered, the concept clearly overwhelming her. Then, with the remarkable adaptability of children, she asked, "Is that why he talks funny? Because he's from Italy, like in my bedtime stories?" I couldn't help but smile. "Yes, that's right. He comes from the same place as those stories I tell you. But why is he here now? Did his important business finish? How to answer that?" I stroked her curls, buying time. "He's been looking for us for a very long time, and he finally found us. He wants to get to know you." Her brow furrowed with the particular concentration she applied to puzzle pieces and difficult coloring book pages. "But if he's my daddy, why didn't we live with him before? Don't mommies and daddies live together?" "Not all mommies and daddies live together," I explained carefully. "Sometimes they live apart because they have different ideas about what's best for their family." "Like when Emma's parents got a divorce?" Sophia asked, referring to a friend from her playgroup. I hesitated. "Something like that, yes." She seemed to consider this, her small face serious. "Will we live with him now?" The question I'd been dreading. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. That's something your daddy and I need to talk about." "I hope we do," she said with startling conviction. "Then I can have a mommy and a daddy, like in the storybooks." Her simple hope pierced my heart. Had I been wrong all these years? Had my fear denied Sophia something essential? The presence of a father who, despite his faults, might have loved her as fiercely as I did? "Let's get you dressed," I said, setting her down gently. Your daddy will be here soon, and we want to look our best, don't we? As I helped Sophia into her favorite blue dress and brushed her unruly curls, my mind continued to race. Whatever I decided, I needed to ensure Sophia's well-being remained the priority. If, and it was still a big if, I agreed to return to Chicago with Dominic, there would need to be conditions, guarantees of safety. The sound of a car approaching pulled me from my thoughts. A glance at the clock confirmed it was barely 8, an hour before Dominic had said he'd send a car. Looking out the window, I saw not the sleek black SUV from last night, but a more modest sedan. Relief flooded through me as I recognized Elena's ancient Fiat. Elena had been my first friend in the village, the owner of the bookshop where I worked, a widow in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She had taken me in when I arrived 5 years ago, visibly pregnant and clearly running from something. She had asked no questions, offered me a job and a shoulder to cry on, and over the years had become like family. Stay here and finish your breakfast, I told Sophia, moving quickly to the door. I needed to intercept Elena before she said anything about Dominic's presence in the village. News traveled fast in small communities, and I had no doubt that the arrival of expensive cars and well-dressed strangers had already become gossip fodder. I stepped onto the porch as Elena was climbing out of her car, her usual basket of fresh bread and pastries in hand. Our Saturday morning ritual, breakfast and coffee while Sophia played in the garden. Emma, she called, using the name I'd adopted here. I brought those chocolate croissants that Sophia loves, and we need to talk about the strangers who've taken over old Bianchi's vineyard. Maria at the cafe says they're Italian, and Giovanna swears she saw men with guns. Can you imagine? In our village. She stopped abruptly as she reached the porch, her eyes narrowing as she took in my appearance. I'd dressed with unusual care this morning, a simple blue dress that I knew brought out my eyes, my hair styled rather than pulled back in its usual practical ponytail. What's happened? Elena asked, her voice dropping. You look different. Before I could answer, the door opened behind me, and Sophia bounded out, her face lighting up at the sight of Elena. Nonna Elena, guess what? My daddy is coming to visit today. He talks funny like the people in Mommy's stories. Elena's basket slipped from her fingers, spilling pastries across the porch. Her eyes flew to mine, wide with shock and concern. Emma? Sophia, why don't you take the pastries inside and put them on a plate? I suggested, keeping my voice light. Remember to wash your hands first. Once Sophia had disappeared inside, Elena gripped my arm. What is she talking about? Has he found you? The man you've been running from? I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Dio mio, she muttered, crossing herself. What will you do? Do you need help? Paolo could drive you to the train station. You could be gone before. It's too late for that, I interrupted gently. He was here last night. He's coming back this morning, and... I took a shaky breath. I'm not sure I want to run anymore. Elena stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. But the things you told me about him, about his business, I know. I bent to pick up the scattered pastries, needing something to do with my hands. It's complicated, Elena. He's Sophia's father. He has rights. Rights? Her voice rose before she caught herself, glancing toward the door. Men like that don't care about rights. They take what they want. She wasn't wrong. But she also didn't know Dominic like I did. The complexity of him. The layers that existed beneath the ruthless exterior. The man who had held my hand through 12 hours of labor when his own mother was dying. Who had taught himself to cook because he noticed I missed my grandmother's recipes. Who had once tracked down a rare first edition of my favorite book just to see me smile. I need to think about what's best for Sophia, I said finally. Elena's expression softened. And what about what's best for you, Kara? You've spent 5 years building a life here, finding peace. Can you really go back to that other world? It was the question I'd been asking myself all night. Could I? The answer terrified me. I don't know, I admitted. But I do know that running again isn't the answer. Sophia deserves stability and maybe she deserves to know her father, too. Elena didn't look convinced, but she squeezed my hand in silent support. Whatever you decide, you are not alone. Remember that. We went inside, where Sophia was attempting to arrange pastries on a plate, with the careful concentration of a child determined to prove her capability. The domestic normalcy of the scene, sunlight streaming through the windows, the scent of coffee and chocolate in the air. Sophia's chatter about the butterfly she'd seen in the garden yesterday felt precious and fragile, as if it might shatter at any moment. Elena stayed for coffee, her usually animated conversation subdued. She watched Sophia with a grandmother's indulgent love, occasionally shooting worried glances my way. When the sound of approaching vehicles reached us, her face paled. "That will be him," I said, setting down my coffee cup with a hand that only slightly trembled. "Elena, would you mind taking Sophia to the garden for a few minutes? I need to speak with Dominic alone first." Elena nodded, her lips pressed into a tight line of disapproval. "Come, Piccola," she said to Sophia, forcing cheerfulness into her voice. "Show me if those seeds we planted last week have started growing." As they disappeared through the back door, I moved to the front window. 2 vehicles had pulled up outside, the black SUV from last night, and behind it, a sleek silver Maserati that seemed to gleam even in the muted morning light. Ostentatious, unmistakably Dominic. He emerged from the Maserati dressed impeccably in what I recognized as a tailored Brioni suit, dark gray with the faintest pinstripe, a crisp white shirt underneath, business attire, not casual weekend wear, a statement of intent. Marco and another man I didn't recognize exited the SUV, taking up positions that gave them clear sightlines to the surrounding area. Always the security detail, always the vigilance that had been such a suffocating part of my life with Dominic. I opened the door before he could knock, needing to maintain whatever small sense of control I could. "You're early." Dominic's eyes swept over me, lingering on the dress, the styled hair. A slight smile curved his lips. "You're expecting me?" "Yes." I stepped aside to let him enter. "Sophia knows you're her father," I told her this morning. He stilled, something vulnerable flashing across his face. "What did she say?" "She's for Dominic. She asked if you talk funny because you're from Italy, and if we'll be living with you now because mommies and daddies are supposed to live together." "And what did you tell her?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "That I don't know yet, that we need to talk about it." I gestured toward the living room, which is why I asked Elena to take her to the garden for a few minutes, so we can establish some ground rules before you see her again. A flicker of irritation crossed his features. Dominic Castellano did not respond well to rules imposed by others, but he nodded and followed me to the living room. He didn't sit, instead moving to the window that overlooked the back garden, where Sophia was crouched beside Elena, examining something in the soil. "She likes to garden?" he asked, his voice softening as he watched his daughter. "She loves it. Anything to do with nature, really. She collects leaves and interesting stones, rescues earthworms from the sidewalk after it rains. She has your compassion," he murmured, still watching Sophia. "And your curiosity," I found myself adding. "She never stops asking questions. Always wants to understand how things work, why things are the way they are." Dominic turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "You said you wanted to establish rules. Go ahead." I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. "If, and I stress if, I agree to return to Chicago with you, I need guarantees. Sophia's safety comes first. Always. No exceptions." "That goes without saying." "It needs to be said explicitly," I insisted. "No business discussions in the house, no weapons where she might find them, no dangerous people anywhere near her." He inclined his head in agreement. "What else?" "We present a united front to her. Whatever issues exist between us, we don't involve her." "Agreed. I have full say in her education, her activities, her daily routine." A slight frown creased his brow. "Within reason. I expect to have input as her father." "Fine. Within reason." I clasped my hands to stop them from trembling. "And one more thing. The most important thing. If at any point I feel that she's in danger because of your business, I reserve the right to leave with her, immediately and without interference from you." His expression hardened. "Unacceptable. Non-negotiable." I countered. We stared at each other, the familiar battle of wills that had characterized so much of our marriage. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and intense. I will give you my word that if a genuine threat to Sophia emerges, I will personally ensure both of you are taken somewhere safe until the threat is neutralized. But you will not disappear with my daughter again, Alessandra. Not ever. It wasn't exactly what I wanted, but it was probably the best I would get. And what about us? What exactly are you expecting if I agree to return? Something flickered in his eyes. Desire, possession, but also uncertainty. Dominic Castellano, uncertain. It was almost unthinkable. You're my wife, he said simply. On paper only, I reminded him. 5 years is a long time, Dominic. We're different people now. Are we? He moved closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from him. Different enough that you don't remember what it was like between us? Different enough that you don't feel it even now? My body's immediate response to his proximity answered that question. But I forced myself to step back. Physical attraction isn't enough to build a life on. It never was. No, he agreed, surprising me. But it's a starting point. The rest. Perhaps we can rediscover it, or create something new. Before I could respond, the back door burst open, and Sophia came racing in, Elena following behind with an apologetic expression. Sorry, she mouthed to me. She saw him through the window. But I barely registered Elena's words, transfixed by the sight of Sophia skidding to a halt in front of Dominic, her eyes wide with excitement and trepidation. Are you really my daddy? She asked, staring up at him with naked hope on her small face. Dominic, the man who commanded respect with a glance, who could reduce hardened criminals to stammering with a single cold smile, seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Slowly, he knelt down to her level, just as he had last night. Yes, Piccola, he said softly. I am your daddy. For a moment, Sophia simply stared at Dominic, absorbing this confirmation of her world's sudden expansion. Then, with the impulsive trust of childhood, she threw her arms around his neck. I watched as Dominic froze, clearly caught off guard by this unrestrained show of affection. After a heartbeat of hesitation, his arms came up to encircle her tiny frame, holding her with a gentleness I'd rarely seen from him. His eyes closed briefly, and when he opened them again, they met mine over Sophia's head. The raw emotion there, a mixture of wonder, gratitude, and something that looked almost like fear, struck me to my core. I always wanted a daddy, Sophia announced, pulling back to examine Dominic's face with frank curiosity. Mommy said you were doing important business, but I wished you would visit. Dominic's throat worked as he swallowed. I wish I could have visited sooner, Piccola. I've been looking for you and your mommy for a very long time. Why couldn't you find us? She asked, her head tilting in that characteristic way when she was puzzling something out. Didn't you know where we lived? I tensed, waiting to see how Dominic would navigate this potential minefield. Would he throw me under the bus, tell our daughter that her mother had deliberately hidden her from him? But Dominic surprised me. Sometimes, Sophia, grown-ups make complicated decisions because they think they're doing what's best. Your mommy wanted to keep you safe, and I wasn't able to find you until now. But what matters is that we're together now. Yes? Relief flooded through me at his diplomatic response. Sophia, however, wasn't entirely satisfied. But why did Mommy think we needed to be safe from you? Are you dangerous? Elena made a small choking sound from the doorway, and I shot her a warning glance. Dominic's face remained impressively neutral as he considered his answer. I would never harm you or your mother, Sophia. Never. But my work. Sometimes it can bring complicated situations. He looked up at me, as if seeking guidance on how much to reveal. Your father is a very important businessman, I interjected, deciding to maintain the simplification we'd agreed upon. Sometimes important people have to be extra careful. Like princesses with bodyguards in stories? Sophia asked, her imagination making the leap to the fairy tales she loved. Dominic's lips quirked in a half-smile. Something like that. Are you rich? Do you have a castle? This time he did laugh, the sound rusty as if long unused. Not a castle, Piccola, but a big house with a garden much larger than this one, and a pool. Her eyes widened, A swimming pool? Like at the hotel we visited last summer? Even bigger, he promised, and it would be yours to swim in whenever you want. I cleared my throat, not wanting Dominic to win her over with material promises. Sophia, why don't you show your father your collection of special stones, the ones on your windowsill? She brightened at the suggestion. Yes. I have the prettiest one that looks like it has stars inside. She grabbed Dominic's hand, tugging him toward her bedroom with the casual entitlement of a child who had never been denied. Come see. Dominic allowed himself to be led away, throwing me one last look over his shoulder, part triumph, part genuine gratitude. Once they were out of earshot, Elena gripped my arm. Emma, what are you doing? You can't seriously be considering going with him. I sank onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted despite the early hour. Look at them, Elena. She's known him for 5 minutes, and already she's looking at him like he hung the moon. Children are easily impressed, Elena said dismissively, especially by men with swimming pools and castles. It's not just that, I said, watching as Sophia's excited chatter filtered back to us from her bedroom. She needs a father. She's been asking about him more and more lately, and he seems to genuinely want to be in her life. Men like him always want what they can't have, Elena muttered darkly. Once he has you both back under his control, who knows what will happen? I couldn't deny the fear underlying her words mirrored my own doubts. But there was something else, too. Something I was reluctant to admit even to myself. Part of me had never stopped loving Dominic, despite everything. The way he looked at Sophia, with that mixture of awe and fierce protectiveness, had awakened feelings I'd thought long buried. I have conditions, I told Elena. Guarantees for Sophia's safety. And if things don't work out, well, I've started over once. I can do it again if necessary. Elena didn't look convinced, but she squeezed my hand. You know I'll help however I can. Whether that means helping you pack or helping you hide again if it comes to that. I know, I said, grateful beyond words for her friendship. Thank you for everything, Elena, for giving me a job, a purpose, for being Sophia's Italian grandmother when she had no other family. Pa, you're family now, she said gruffly, blinking away suspicious moisture in her eyes. And family looks out for each other. Remember that, no matter where you go. From Sophia's room came the sound of delighted giggles, followed by Dominic's deeper laugh. The normalcy of it sent a pang through my heart. This is what might have been, if things had been different, if Dominic had been different. Elena left shortly after, extracting promises from me to call, to write, to let her know we were safe. As I walked her to the door, she pulled me into a fierce hug. Trust your instincts, she whispered. They kept you and Sophia safe for 5 years. Don't start doubting them now, I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Elena had been my anchor in a turbulent sea, and leaving her behind felt like casting off my last line of safety. When I returned to the living room, Dominic and Sophia were coming out of her bedroom, hand in hand. Sophia clutched a small felt pouch that I recognized as her collection of special treasures. I showed Daddy all my stones and my butterfly wing and the blue feather I found last week, she announced proudly. And he said I could bring them all to our new house and he'll get me a special shelf to display them. I raised an eyebrow at Dominic. Did he now? That's presumptuous of him, since we haven't decided anything yet. Dominic had the grace to look slightly abashed. I may have gotten ahead of myself. Mommy, can we go see Daddy's house? Please? He says there are horses nearby. Sophia was practically vibrating with excitement, already won over by the promise of animals and adventure. I sighed, shooting Dominic an accusatory look. You're not playing fair. He shrugged, not bothering to deny it. I've lost 5 years with my daughter. I'm not above using any advantage I have. I need to talk to your father alone for a minute, I told Sophia. Why don't you go pack your favorite toys in your backpack, just in case we decide to visit his house today? She needed no further encouragement, rushing back to her room with the focused energy only a child can muster for an exciting task. That was manipulative, I said, once she was out of earshot. Promising her horses and swimming pools and special shelves, I offered her nothing I can't provide, Dominic countered, and nothing I wouldn't have given her all along had I known she existed. I couldn't argue with that, as much as I wanted to. She's excited now because it's new and you're essentially a fairy tale come to life, the mysterious father bearing gifts. But real life isn't a fairy tale, Dominic. What happens when she sees the reality of your world? She'll see a father who adores her and will move heaven and earth to keep her safe and happy. He moved closer, his voice softening. And a mother who was brave enough to do what she thought was right, even when it broke her heart. The unexpected understanding in his words caught me off guard. You think it broke my heart to leave? Didn't it? He reached out, his fingers lightly tracing the line of my jaw. It nearly destroyed me when you disappeared. I can't believe you walked away unscathed. I pulled back from his touch, unwilling to show how it still affected me. I did what I had to do to protect our child. And now I'm asking you to trust me to protect both of you. To come home, Alessandra. Not just for Sophia's sake, but for your own. For mine. His naked vulnerability was more persuasive than any argument or threat could have been. The Dominic I had known rarely showed weakness, rarely admitted to needing anyone. This was new territory. If I agree, I said slowly, we take it one day at a time. No promises beyond that. Hope flared in his eyes. Does that mean you're coming? It means I'm willing to try for Sophia's sake. I held up a hand when he started to speak. But my conditions still stand. Her safety comes first. Always. Always. He agreed without hesitation. And we don't rush things between us, I added. We may still be legally married, but in every way that matters, we're strangers now. Something like pain flickered across his face, but he nodded. Your terms are acceptable, for now. I'll need a few days to settle things here. To say proper goodbyes, to arrange for someone to take over the cottage lease. Already taken care of, Dominic interrupted smoothly. The cottage is paid off through the end of the year. Elena will continue to receive her salary as bookshop manager. Your neighbor, Mrs. Rossi, has agreed to tend your garden and look after anything you leave behind. I stared at him. You've been busy. I told you. I've known your approximate location for some time. I've had contingencies in place for when, not if, I found you. His confidence should have angered me, but instead it brought an odd comfort. It was so quintessentially Dominic, the strategic planning, the attention to detail, the absolute certainty that he would get what he wanted in the end. There's a jet waiting at the private airfield outside Milan, he continued. We can be home by tonight. Today? I hadn't expected things to move so quickly. That's too fast. I need time to process this, to prepare Sophia. She seems quite prepared to me, Dominic observed dryly, gesturing toward the hallway where Sophia had reappeared, struggling under the weight of a backpack nearly as large as she was. I packed Bunny and Rex and my fairy books and my special blanket and my rain boots, because Daddy said it might rain in Chicago sometimes, she announced breathlessly. Can we go now? Can we see the horses today? I looked from my daughter's excited face to Dominic's expectant one and realized I was outnumbered. Let me pack a few things, I said, surrendering to the inevitable. And we need to stop by Elena's to say a proper goodbye, Sophia cheered, doing a little dance of excitement. Dominic's expression was more subdued, but no less triumphant. The look of a man who had finally reclaimed what he considered his. As I moved toward my bedroom to pack, Dominic caught my arm gently. Thank you, he said quietly, his eyes sincere in a way I rarely remembered seeing. For giving us, this chance. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The mixture of emotions swirling through me was too complex to articulate. Fear and hope and resignation and, yes, a traitorous spark of the love I had never fully extinguished. In my bedroom, I packed quickly, taking only essentials and a few sentimental items. The first seashell Sophia had found on our trip to the coast, a pressed flower from Elena's garden, the worn copy of Jane Eyre that had been my constant companion since college. The life I had built here could be dismantled and packed away in less than 20 minutes. The thought was both liberating and deeply sad. When I emerged with my small suitcase, Dominic was sitting on the sofa with Sophia on his knee, listening with apparent fascination as she explained the intricacies of her preschool's social hierarchy. The domesticity of the scene struck me like a physical blow. This is what we might have had all along, had circumstances been different. Ready? Dominic asked, looking up. As I'll ever be, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The drive to Elena's was brief and tearful. My friend hugged Sophia fiercely, making her promise to call every week and to remember her Nonna Elena even in her fancy new life. To Dominic, she offered only a cool nod and a warning glance that promised retribution if he failed to keep us safe. He accepted it with surprising grace. As we drove away from the village that had been our sanctuary for 5 years, I felt Sophia's small hand slip into mine. "Are you sad, Mommy?" she asked, her perceptiveness sometimes startling for one so young. "A little," I admitted. "I'll miss Elena and our cottage and the bookshop." "But we'll have Daddy now," she said with the simple logic of childhood. "And a big garden and horses and a swimming pool." "Yes," I said, glancing at Dominic in the driver's seat, his profile strong against the backdrop of the mountain road. "We'll have your Daddy now. For better or worse, we were going home. Back to a place I had fled in terror. Back to a life I had rejected. Back to a man who was both my greatest weakness, and perhaps the only one who could truly keep us safe in a world that was more dangerous than Sophia could possibly imagine." As we reached the main road, Dominic extended his hand across the console, palm up, an invitation, not a demand. After a moment's hesitation, I placed my hand in his, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that had once both protected and imprisoned me. "Trust me, Alessandra," he said softly, his eyes never leaving the road ahead. "Just once more." Against my better judgment, against the warning still echoing in my head, I found myself doing just that. The private jet gleamed in the afternoon sun, a sleek testament to Dominic's wealth and power. Sophia gasped as we approached, her eyes wide with wonder. "We're flying in that?" she squealed, bouncing on her toes. "It looks like the planes in my picture books." Dominic smiled down at her, genuine warmth transforming his usually stern features. "This is our family plane, Piccola, much more comfortable than the commercial flights you've taken with your mother." I bristled slightly at the implied criticism of the modest life I'd provided for Sophia, but held my tongue. This was no time to start an argument, not when our daughter was watching us so closely for any sign of discord. The pilot greeted Dominic with deferential respect, while Marco and 2 other security men efficiently loaded our meager luggage. As we boarded, I was struck by the opulent interior, all cream leather and polished wood, with fresh flowers in crystal vases and champagne chilling in a silver bucket. "This is like a flying house," Sophia declared, running from seat to seat, examining every button and compartment with delighted curiosity. "Careful, sweetheart," I cautioned as she pressed her face against a window. "Don't touch anything without asking first." "Let her explore," Dominic said, loosening his tie as he settled into one of the plush seats. "She should get used to this. It's her birthright, after all." I took the seat across from him, keeping Sophia in my peripheral vision as she continued her excited investigation of the cabin. "Her birthright is safety and happiness, Dominic, not luxury." "Why not both?" he countered, his gaze following our daughter with undisguised pride. "Why should she have to choose? I never did." "Because you were born into this world," I thought, but didn't say. "Because your father was Don Castellano before you, and his father before him. Because the empire you inherited was already built on blood and fear. Instead," I said, "I just don't want her growing up thinking money and power are the most important things." "They're not," he agreed, surprising me. "Family is. Loyalty, honor. Those are the values I was raised with, Alessandra. Those are the values I intend to pass on to our daughter." Before I could respond, Sophia bounded over, clambering onto the seat beside Dominic. "Daddy, the nice lady said there's ice cream. Can I have some, please?" Dominic chuckled, tucking a curl behind her ear with a tenderness that still caught me off guard. "Of course, Piccola. You can have anything you want." I opened my mouth to protest that ice cream before takeoff wasn't the best idea, then closed it again. This was what co-parenting with Dominic would be like, I realized. A constant balancing act between his indulgence and my practicality. I would need to choose my battles carefully. As the jet lifted off, carrying us away from the life we'd known, I gazed out the window at the shrinking landscape below. The mountains and valleys, the village that had sheltered us, all grew smaller until they disappeared beneath a blanket of clouds. Just like that, one chapter of our lives closed, and another began. The flight passed in a blur of Sophia's excitement and my growing anxiety. Dominic spent most of the journey showing Sophia maps on his tablet, pointing out where Chicago was, telling her about the house and the city and all the things they would do together. I watched them, this father and daughter getting to know each other, and felt both joy and fear in equal measure. By the time we began our descent into Chicago, Sophia had fallen asleep, her head resting trustingly against Dominic's chest, his arm protectively around her small shoulders. He looked up, catching me watching them. "She's exhausted," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from Sophia's forehead. "The excitement was too much. She'll probably sleep through the night," I agreed. "Time zone changes usually hit her hard." "I've had the guest wing prepared for you both," Dominic said, his voice carefully neutral. "Your old rooms. I thought they might be too full of memories." I nodded, grateful for this small consideration. The master suite we had once shared held too many complicated emotions, too many nights of passion followed by dawning realizations of the man I had truly married. "Thank you," I said simply. As the jet touched down, I felt the familiar knot of tension form in my stomach, the one that had been my constant companion during my marriage to Dominic. Chicago had never truly felt like home to me, always more like a beautiful prison where I was watched, protected, and ultimately controlled. A motorcade of black SUVs waited on the tarmac, 3 identical vehicles, a security precaution I remembered well from before. Dominic carried the still sleeping Sophia himself, refusing Marco's offer of assistance. I followed them down the steps, the humid Chicago air hitting me like a wall after the cool mountain climate I'd grown accustomed to. "Welcome home, Mrs. Castellano," Marco said quietly as he helped me into the middle SUV. Home. The word felt foreign, uncomfortable. But as Dominic settled beside me, Sophia cradled against his chest, I realized that home wasn't the sprawling mansion we were heading to. Home was wherever my daughter was. And for now, at least, that meant being here, with Dominic. The drive through the city stirred a complex mix of emotions. Recognition of familiar landmarks mingled with the strangeness of returning to a place I'd fled in terror. Chicago's skyline glittered against the darkening sky, beautiful and intimidating. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. We passed through the wrought iron gates of the Castellano estate in the exclusive North Shore area, the familiar drive lined with ancient oaks leading up to the imposing limestone mansion. Security cameras tracked our progress, and I knew that somewhere in the guardhouse, armed men were monitoring our arrival. "I've made some changes since you left," Dominic said, as the SUV pulled up to the front entrance. "Security upgrades, mainly, and I had the gardens redesigned. I thought you might like a proper playground installed for Sophia." The consideration in his voice caught me off guard. "That was thoughtful of you." He shrugged, attempting to appear nonchalant, but I could see the hope in his eyes. Hope that I would acknowledge his efforts, that I would see he was trying. The household staff lined up to greet us. Some familiar faces, some new. At the front stood Mrs. Abernathy, the housekeeper who had run Dominic's household with military precision for as long as I'd known him. Her usually stern face softened as she saw me, and to my surprise, she stepped forward to embrace me. "Welcome home, Mrs. Castellano," she whispered, her Scottish brogue as thick as ever. "It hasn't been the same without you." Touched by the unexpected welcome, I returned her embrace. "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. It's good to see you again." Dominic carried Sophia up the grand staircase to the guest wing, where a room had been prepared for her that made me catch my breath. Someone, Dominic himself, had researched what little girls her age might like and gone overboard. A canopy bed with gossamer curtains dominated one wall, while shelves filled with books and toys lined another. A hand-painted mural of an enchanted forest covered the third wall, complete with tiny fairies and woodland creatures hidden among the trees. "I had it done last year," Dominic admitted, as he gently laid Sophia on the bed. "When my men narrowed down your location to the region, I wanted to be ready, just in case. The thought of Dominic preparing a room for a daughter he hadn't yet found, maintaining hope despite the years of fruitless searching, created a crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. "It's beautiful," I said softly. "She'll love it when she wakes up." Together, we removed Sophia's shoes and tucked her under the covers, her favorite stuffed rabbit nestled beside her. She stirred briefly, mumbling something unintelligible before drifting deeper into sleep. We stood side by side, watching our daughter sleep in a room designed by a father she hadn't known existed until this morning. The surreal nature of the situation wasn't lost on me. How quickly life could change, how suddenly the future could shift direction. "Your room is through there," Dominic said, gesturing to a connecting door. "I thought you'd want to be close to her while she adjusts." I nodded, appreciating his understanding. "Thank you." We slipped out of Sophia's room, closing the door quietly behind us. In the hallway, the tension between us shifted, becoming something heavier, more charged. Without Sophia as a buffer, we were just a man and woman with a complicated past and an uncertain future. "Are you hungry?" Dominic asked. "Mrs. Abernathy can prepare something." I shook my head. "Just tired. It's been an overwhelming day for all of us," he agreed. Then, after a moment's hesitation, "I'm glad you're here, Alessandra, both of you. Whatever happens between us, never doubt that." I met his gaze, seeing the sincerity there. "I'm trying to trust this decision, Dominic. Trying to believe it's the right thing for Sophia. For all of us." "It is," he said with quiet conviction. "I'll prove it to you day by day." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "Dominic, why did you never file for divorce? In 5 years you must have been tempted." He paused, his back to me, shoulders rigid beneath his expensive suit. "Because I never stopped loving you," he said simply. "Even when I hated you for leaving, for taking my child, I never stopped loving you, and I never will." With that, he walked away, leaving me standing in the hallway of a house that had once been my prison and might now become my home. A house where my daughter would grow up knowing her father, for better or worse. A house where perhaps Dominic and I might find a way forward, not back to what we were, but toward something new, something built on honesty this time. As I entered my room and closed the door behind me, I felt the weight of the day's decisions settle over me. Only time would tell if I'd made the right choice in returning, in allowing Dominic back into our lives. But watching him with Sophia, seeing the love in his eyes when he looked at her, gave me hope that perhaps there was more to Dominic Castellano than the dangerous man I had fled. Perhaps there was redemption possible, even for a man like him. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was a second chance waiting for all of us.